Cindy Watson is the founder of Women on Purpose and creator of the Art of Feminine Negotiation and her Suasion programs. She is also the founder and managing director of Watson Palmer Law. As an attorney specializing in social justice law for 30 years. She is a TEDx and international speaker, Wall Street Journal and U.S. Today best-selling and award-winning author, master negotiator, and consultant known for her passion, commitment, and ability to inspire. As a world-class women's empowerment coach and consultant, Cindy has proved track record empowering, advocating, and motivating people to rediscover their purpose and become the best version of themselves so they can negotiate their best life. Please welcome Cindy Watson. Welcome everybody to Money 911, where we talk about health, wealth, and peace of mind, because they're all synergistically integrated and we all have to have it connected. Because if you have a whole lot of money but you don't have your health, what's the point, right? And right now, I talk a lot about crash-proof your finances, so I want you guys to make sure you subscribe, push the button, tune in. We're broadcasting a lot of information about the shifts in the money world and what's going on, how to crash-proof what you have. And then I invite some amazing guests. So you've already heard our beautiful intro for Cindy Watson here and Women on Purpose. And I'm really excited, Cindy, because this is the deal, having the purpose, right?
Oh, so important. And thanks. People have baggage around money. So the fact that you're helping to bust through some of those myths around money so people can be more empowered, so important.
It is. And, it's not anybody's fault. There's no judgment, but you go to school, you learn how to make money, and you get out of school. What do? Go make money. Most people, right? Give it to somebody else to gamble. So it's a roulette wheel. Will it be up or down when you retire? So I like to show people places where they can put it where it never goes down. And that's really, but we talk about that on other shows. So I want to make sure people really get to hear all of it because it's so important. And then we talk about, a whole lot of conversations on how people build their businesses and how to have a life and a business with purpose.
Yeah. Yeah.
What,
Yeah.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, I was going to say so much of what you're talking about, I think, is based on our conditioning, right? We have, and it's one of the things that prompted me to write The Art of Feminine Negotiation and to create the programming around it is because I had my epiphany that, oh my gosh, we have all been duped into believing that success is based on this really competitive winner take all, very sort of more masculine kind of approach to life, whether our approach to money, our approach to business, our approach to our relationships. And in fact, the opposite is true. I think that true success comes when we actually embrace a more collaborative, an abundance versus a scarcity mindset, get away from those limiting, and that increases our capacity to get so much more.
Exactly. And, we can see the the results, the fruits of that over, masculine and I'm not getting into the male female, but it's an energy. I mean, I have to become more, quote, masculine in a business world, more pushy and, it's when I got into the insurance, I was in 30 years ago, I was one of the first women in this space. And, there's breakthrough things. There are conceptions and people look at you different. And it really, really is true. As much as I didn't really want to admit that there really is those distinctions. So we are shifting. The whole world is shifting, but we want to shift to life with a purpose, right? And break through all the limiting beliefs and things that everybody's born into. When we're talking about, quote, women, right, pursuing their purposes, what do you think is one of the biggest challenges that women are facing right now?
Yeah. Well, and I'm really glad you raised that gender piece as well. It's one of the reasons I agonized over using the word feminine in the title of the
Yeah,
book, right? Because I
right.
knew there'd be pushback because
Hmm.
we are moving away from gender attributions, I think, as a society, and that's a good thing. But I ended up landing, and I love your question because one of the reasons I decided to keep the word feminine in is that for so long, women in particular have really been affected by that conditioning around what it means to be successful. And, it wasn't that long ago that women couldn't own property. In fact, we were considered property, right? I mean, in relatively recent history. And I think even though we're in this period of transition, it's really women have been conditioned to do what's expected of them, play small, don't make yourself bigger than life, all of things which are a recipe for living a small life, for negotiating, frankly, a smaller life. So for
Right.
me, that was one of the initial things that prompted this idea about creating women on purpose. Because I think we often pursue in life what we're told, what's expected of us, rather than following our true passion. So that was sort of the genesis of it. But I
Yeah.
think today still women are facing a lot of unconscious gender bias. And I think we need to start talking about the impact. And we all have masculine and feminine energy, right? So
Right.
that's why I say I'm glad you raised the gender piece, because this isn't about negotiating like a man or negotiating
Right.
like a woman. It's about tapping into those traits that people, rightly or wrongly, either consider to be more feminine or masculine traits, so that you can be more authentically yourself and get better outcomes and be more on purpose.
Exactly. And that's how creation is created. There really is, the sun and the moon, the like yin yang, and it's how synergetic. Like I use that word I hardly ever use that word, but it is how it all works together. I think that the the whole all of that is a gender misdirection.
Yes.
The direction should be
Yeah.
inside of ourselves, not outside. What does your body look like and all of that?
Yeah.
But where's your inner strength,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
the reliance on that spirit inside and the self-doubt and the fear. And don't you see a lot of women getting stuck in that, right? Because
Yeah.
they don't know who they are anymore, and where
Oh,
how do they get there? How do you show them how to tap into that?
Oh, you are speaking my language, Kris, because, and as you were saying that, I was thinking, I mean, I think women are feeling lost. Well, I think both men and women are feeling lost because of that conditioning that I've talked about. I think what
Mhm.
happened with that is both men and women saw those so-called feminine skills as a liability. It's like, oh, the path to success is this competitive, masculine, talk over people kind of model.
Yeah.
So both men and women stifled our feminine, seeing it as a liability. And I think that's what kicks. I know for me personally, that threw me out of balance. Like my client, if full transparency, in my law practice, before I started Women on Purpose, my clients for the longest time called me the Barracuda, because I came out of law school, this fresh faced 20 something, like you said, starting in the insurance industry, almost always the only woman in the room. And I kind of remember looking around going, oh my gosh, if I'm going to get taken seriously, I need to get scrappier. And so I did. But there's a high cost with that. So I think it's so important for people to now recognize these so-called feminine traits, not as a liability, but there are secret weapons. And if you actually look at the key traits that make the most effective leaders, the most effective negotiators, ironically, 5 out of 6 of them are traits that people consider feminine. And yet, as I say, we've been duped into following this more masculine competitive model that does not get better outcomes.
Right. Creates wars.
Yes. Yes.
So how can women, because that's who you're talking to, and it's a lot of disempowerment. How can they use their purpose to create positive change and change their communities, their
Yeah.
businesses, right? Everything just right around them. How would you say
Yeah.
that?
Well, the first thing I do with most of my clients, with all of my clients, I have them start what I call a brag list, because I think a lot of it comes back. We need to push past those stories we've been telling us that we're not enough, that we need to play small, all of that conditioning that doesn't allow us to step into the full force of our feminine power, but also doesn't even allow us to recognize the power of bringing that feminine, authentic energy. So I have them start a brag list. I give them a little leather journal, and I ask them to start by writing down 25 things things that they love about themselves. And you would think that's pretty simple, but I cannot tell you, when I do this at live events, invariably 3/4 of the room sit there just shell shocked, like they cannot come up with 25 things that they love about themselves. We're so pushing past that. I think creating a brag list and keeping it going. So start listing 25 things, the tangibles, the intangibles, things that you're good at, nice things people have said about you, nice things people should have said about you. And you make that list. And then every night before you're going to bed, when your subconscious is at its most open, you read over the list of things that you can love about yourself and add. And I challenge all your listeners, add 5 things every day, because we tend to beat ourselves up about all the things we can't do or the mistakes that we've made, the things we do wrong. So every day, as we're just about to sleep, we then can spend our sleeping hours percolating about all of the things that we've achieved. And it forces us to look every day at something new that we've achieved that we can appreciate about ourselves. So I think that self-love piece is the first piece, but also recognizing, ask for what you want. Practice, practice, practice. Studies show men who get offered their first salary, 67% of them will negotiate for more, as compared to only 7% of women. That is a staggering difference, right? So women ask for less, and we don't ask often enough, and we ask for less. So definitely start practicing your power. Lean into those feminine skills, recognize that your empathy, your ability to show up with compassion and to listen intently, to get curious and ask questions, these are your greatest assets. These aren't liabilities you need to be stifling. Own these as your secret weapons to be able to get even better outcomes than you could have ever anticipated. That's a great starting place.
Yeah, that's super because it really does. Believe it or not, those things really work. I mean, I do something similar where before I get up out of bed, I think of 5 things I'm grateful for. I want to
Yeah,
stay in gratitude. And
yeah,
when I can stay there, it changes everything. Right? It brings the opportunities into the
yeah,
place that wouldn't have ever been there before if I was complaining or worrying or in doubt.
yeah,
And when you talk about, look, seeing all, the attributes that you already have instead of the
yeah,
stories that are being told in the brain
yeah,
that that push you down, and you don't even realize it because you're inside your body. And that's
yeah.
why I think mentorship and community are so important, right? Wouldn't you
Yeah.
say?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, my gosh, my gosh, I've been coaching and consulting now. I've got, my book's a Wall Street Journal bestseller, and I still join masterminds. I join programs. I think we always need to be in that growth mindset and constantly reminding ourselves of our value. Because even myself, most people would have said, oh my gosh, Cindy, she's so confident the way she shows up. But I had a hard lesson recognizing that I still had mindset issues around money, right? I grew up in a low rental apartment complex. So, like a lot of people who do, I was very driven, right? To go from high
Right.
school to university to law school, getting those straight A's to prove to the world. You're not aware of it, I think, consciously, but to prove that I was worth it, that I had value. And even with that, I remember the first time I got what I considered an extravagant vehicle, right? I bought a Caddy Escalade, and I'm like, oh, this is such a sweet ride. And it took me quite a while before I realized there was a part of me that was actually embarrassed of it, because I associated money with greed and had all these negative connotations about what it meant to be rich, to have wealth. And I would show up at venues as a lawyer with my clients. And if I saw my clients standing at the front of the venue, I would drive around the back of the building because I was embarrassed of this Caddy Escalade. And that mindset had me charging less than I was worth until I finally had my epiphany about owning my value. I don't want to be the Walmart of the legal industry. I don't want to be the Walmart of my women's empowerment coaching. So I would say for all of your listeners, really be constantly reminding yourself of ways to appreciate your value and really own your value.
That's really true because that's how you can step forward. I remember when, I had, I was nominated for a Grammy. I write songs and
Oh, congrats. I did
inspirational.
not know that about
Yeah,
you.
I have few number ones. I'm actually still on a record label too in Nashville, Copper Lily Records. And, I have songs and CDs out. But when when I'm in that world, it's really easy to be who I am, but in, say, Nashville or on stage somewhere. But when I came back to my own community, to the people around me, just like you were saying, I was embarrassed at what,
Yeah.
like, oh, you're too, I didn't want anybody else to feel bad. So I really couldn't share who I was. And
Yeah.
we're so preoccupied with everything on the outside. And
Yeah.
the outside is trying to distract us. The journey is inside.
Yeah.
And no matter what we think, all these are just props to take us, which I feel is where the heart and the mind come together, the sacred heart, right?
Yes.
Where it comes
Absolutely.
together. But we're all in our brain. We lost the connection with the heart, and the
Yeah.
journey is back into that place. They always show that picture of Jesus with his heart, like,
Yeah.
but it's in his throat. It's what
Yeah.
they call the sacred heart, where the
Yeah.
heart and the mind come together. And that's talked about in all over the planet, in a lot of different ways that people practice spiritual
Yeah.
this. But the point is you can't move forward until you really know who you are and you feel good about you are, and there's like nothing wrong with you. All of those things are conceptual, or the
Yeah.
things that you have to work on, you look at them differently, right? You look at them
Oh,
as like a challenge to excel.
yeah. And as you were saying that, Kris, it really struck me. Tied to that is going deeper to recognize those unconscious biases that have held you back. And I would say that was probably one of the most surprising things I found in the research that I was doing for the book. And I thought I knew, like, I already would have considered myself an expert in this, but some of the studies were staggering. Like, young women who, not only does it affect our job opportunities and those are things we're aware of, but young women who were writing their SAT exams, when women were asked to check off and identify their gender in advance of writing their test, simply check off whether they were male or female, consistently in study after study, that half of the control group who were asked to identify their gender actually performed more poorly. Like, think about the power of an unconscious gender bias where it actually affects our ability to perform. So I think we need a couple of things. We need to stop blaming and shaming. Every time we
Yes.
think about gender bias, we immediately think it's bias by men against women. Things aren't going to change unless we start owning that it's also biased by women against other women. We don't often lift each other up in the ways that we could and should, but also even by women against ourselves. We carry these deep-seated biases about what it means to be a woman, and we allow ourselves to underperform, to not shine with that brightest heart light that you were talking about. So I love that insight
Yeah.
shared.
And it's so true, because you can't shine if you're looking at the negative part of yourself or all the failures, instead of like, well, the failures were challenges to help you become even brighter, right? And lighter, and
Absolutely.
right, and be able, but a lot of times, because there's so much noise and all the media and everything that you hear is a distraction, and it's not
Absolutely.
leading people to the spirit. It's leading people off into places that they will regret,
Yeah.
unfortunately, later.
Yeah.
It may be trending now, but it's not going to be helpful and healthful for people
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
long run. So these are the challenges. And what do you think? Like, people around the world are, everything is going through a shift, but
Yeah.
there is a commonality amongst us.
Yeah.
And when you talk to women about finding their purpose, how do you guide them? Because how do they make this map to who they are and how they manifest that in the world?
Yeah, and there's a number of little really simple processes that you can go through, and I'm happy to share with your listeners. I'll give you a link at the end that people can go to for a free resource on some of those, about how you rediscover and tap back into. And some of it involves going back to remembering what are the things that filled me with joy as a child, right? And if I look to the people who inspire me, make a list of all of the people who inspire you and what are the qualities that you're most attracted to about them? Because normally we're attracted to those qualities that we want or see in ourselves, but maybe don't fully appreciate. So really start tapping into those qualities again of who we want to be, who we aspire to show up as. Do a heart map, list all of the things that you love or that you feel passionately about. And one that I love in particular, get people to do interviews with 5 people in your life. and from different areas of your life, like, one family, one a work connection, maybe a friend, all of these different qualities, and ask them a series of questions about the things. What are the things that they believe light you up? What are the things that they think that you're best at? And when you go through and you can line up all of these little simple series of exercises about things that filled you up as a child, that the people that you aspire and admire, right? To be like, and your perception of the things that fill you up, the things you think you're best at as compared to others, you start getting a better sense about what some of your true gifts are, and realize whether or not you're actually living into your passion and purpose and living into your gifts. And one thing I just want to share, when you had mentioned about we're in this period of transition, I think it's worth mentioning, people are sick of talking about the pandemic. But one, I think, possibly great thing that came through the pandemic is that people, for the first time, were examining their lives in a much more profound way and recognizing that this competitive model that keeps getting jammed down our throats, as you say, in all of our media, in the shows that we watch, people were like, there's got to be a better way where I can show up and have more calm in my life, more joy in my life. So I think that shift happened. And coincident with that, you started hearing people say, countries that had female leaders actually did better than during COVID. And I never get into an argument about whether that's true or not, because I actually don't think it matters. But what does matter from that conversation is that for the first time in a long time, certainly the first time in my lifetime, people are recognizing those so-called feminine traits or skills as critical leadership skills. So for all your listeners out there, I think if you're male or female, if you've been avoiding leaning into your feminine, leaning into those traits that are recognized as sort of feminine, now is the time. There is an open window now for you to really take advantage of this recognition that these are valuable skills. So own them, lean into them. Don't let people tell you that emotion is a bad thing. Lean into the emotion in your negotiations. If somebody's getting all frazzled, don't back away, lean in and say, okay, you seem to really be reacting. Let's talk about that, right? What is it that's so triggering for you? And then that's where the gold comes up, where you really getting below the surface of those stated needs into what really drives people. And as you know, Kris, when you're negotiating about money, it's never just about the money. It's what that money represents for people, right? So
Exactly.
I love your question.
Yeah, and it's so important that we can be able to be free to talk to each other and not be judged. I mean, because how many people actually remember, what they were angry about
Yeah.
last year? I mean, everything's moving so fast
Yeah.
that, you just got to forgive and let go, and it changes everything from um, competition to cooperation.
Yes.
Like, how
Yeah.
can we work together?
Yeah.
And we're going to be forced into that.
Yeah.
The world is going to be forced into that because
Yeah.
as this thing shifts, is a global. A lot of people say it's a recession or a depression, but it's the end of
Yeah.
the dollar.
Yeah.
It's a shift of how, right, the things are set up, and the way that, different countries have dominated and other
Yeah.
ones are trying to be more powerful. And it hasn't anything to do with any of that, but we're going to have
Yeah.
to have a map to get through the
Yeah.
chaos
Well,
that
and
is.
the interesting thing is, I love that you're talking about that moving away from competition to collaboration, because that
Yes.
at its heart is like the art of feminine negotiation. And the interesting thing, it's so counterintuitive because people believe the path to success is that harsher model where it's I take everything. It's all about me, that
Right.
ego driven. And you actually get better outcomes, more creative solutions. You get better relationships. You get better buy-in. You get longer lasting agreements. All the things that make for the most successful businesses, for the most successful entrepreneurs, for the most successful corporate interests, and for the most successful personal relationships by tapping into what I call the art of feminine negotiation, call it a more collaborative model. And tied to that, I was just thinking as you were saying about how do we tap into that purpose and show up. And it reminded me of, and I'd remind your listeners, think back to what is your authentic self, right? Like there's no one way to be a man or a woman or any of the spaces in between. But I really invite you to consider whether the way you've been showing up is truly authentically you. You know, as I say, my clients called me the Barracuda because I believe that was the only way to succeed. And I did well at that, don't get me wrong, but there was a big cost with it. But when I thought back then to a negotiation course I took in law school, I probably wouldn't have taken it if I'd known you were negotiating for your marks. You know, you got broken off into pairs. You had 50 minutes to negotiate a deal. Whoever got the best negotiated settlement got the best mark. So you can imagine in a competitive law school how that went.
Right.
But in hindsight, I didn't realize it at the time. I won virtually every negotiation that year. And I'm not saying that to brag. I'm only saying it because I'm actually embarrassed that it took me many years to realize, after being a barracuda in the practice of law, that's not how I won all of those negotiations in law school. I came to every one of those negotiations, Kris, going, we've only got 50 minutes. Tell me what you need. What do you want? What can I do for you? What can I give you? I was using the art of feminine negotiation a decade before I ever created it. It was intuitive to me when I came from a place of just natural, authentic me.
That's it right there. And everybody's already got that. So it's not some big thing you have to learn other than
Yeah.
how you get there, how you go
Yeah.
back to who you are
Yes.
and
Absolutely.
break off all the things that, the world is taking you into.
Yeah.
What do you think Women on Purpose will have for all the women around the world, and how would you see the future of that organization?
Yeah, well, I love that you asked that because I think, on my best days,
Yeah.
when I close my eyes and imagine the ripple effect of what a world would be like with that. And again, not just for women, because I definitely, like in my masterminds and my VIPs, I definitely target and attract my clients are women, right? Because I feel women have been at such a disadvantage. But I also do a lot of corporate work where it's about for both men and women, because that's where I think the world's really going to shift, Kris. And I imagine a world where everybody showed up for their negotiations, which is whether on a global conflict scale to negotiating with your kids or your intimate partner. If we approached all conversations that we thought might be potentially difficult conversations from a place of I am going to release my ego and I'm going to get really intentional about how can I build rapport and real meaningful connection with this other party? How can I bring empathy by getting curious to ask questions to truly understand what they want and need, even and especially when I believe I profoundly disagree with their position? How can I show up with that open mind and curiosity? How can every time I realize I'm making it about me, I stop, drop, and roll and immediately get curious and start asking questions, right? How can I build trust intentionally? What are things I can do to build trust? That is such a game changer. And the irony is, the more we think about giving to the other person, when we come from a place of grounded purposeness, and when we approach it from, as I say, I call it the art of feminine negotiation, call it what you want, but with this new model, imagine the impact. And we end up getting not only better results for ourselves, which is counterintuitive, right? We assume, oh, if I make the focus all about them, I'm going to be giving up, I'm going to be conceding. And trust me, as someone who was a barracuda and believed I had tremendous success, since I've switched to this new model of showing up, I get way better outcomes than I ever did as the barracuda. Outcomes that wouldn't have even been on the table before, because if I come thinking I want X and you want Y and we're fighting about that, either one of us gets X and the other person walks away, oh, I didn't get what I wanted, or they get it and I walk away dejected, or we split the baby or get something in between. But when we show up from a place of curiosity and seeking to truly understand and meet the needs of the other party and get creative and a little vulnerable, all of a sudden, there's all of these potential solutions that open up that would never have even come up in the
That's true.
conversation had we not taken that approach.
That's absolutely true. And they use the word transparent, but that really is when you have nothing to hide, nothing to defend, nothing to protect, and you're coming from a place of being compassionate and actually seeing yourself like I'm every woman. I really am every woman.
Yeah.
I can't judge another,
Yeah.
man or woman,
Yeah.
because we really it's all a spiritual, to me it's a spiritual journey, and everybody goes through all the different phases. So when
Yeah.
you get to the top of the mountain, which there's never really any. You know, you become everybody, and you can see yourself in that person, and there's a little more compassion,
Yeah.
then because the arrogance starts to go away.
Yes.
You want
Yes.
to help others more than what am I going to get from myself. That changes
Yeah.
probably with age too,
Yeah.
right? we're and because everybody has different value systems too. They've been born
Yeah.
in, and their goals are all, oh, that's just what you see on TV. If you have a lot of stuff, then that's success.
Yeah.
And now that, I think, like you said, from a few years of taking a little bit of time off, people are like, well, what are the priorities
Yeah.
now, right?
Yes.
Friends,
Yes.
family,
Yeah.
time out. Yeah,
Yeah.
the wealth is great, but it all has to be in its place.
Yeah. And I love that you talked about transparency, because that's the opposite of what we're taught, right? I mean, we're taught that to be a good negotiator, hold your cards close to your
Right,
chest
right.
and don't ever admit when you're wrong, right? You'll lose credibility. And it turns out all of those things are myths.
Mm,
And they're really destructive myths, frankly, because we definitely get more when we can show up from a place with that vulnerability. When we get, I say you talk about the Titanic with the icebergs.
right.
Everybody's stated needs are just that tip of the iceberg. It's what's below that. What are people's deep whys? What is really driving it? And people assume that transparency is a weakness. And that's the one complaint or worry, I guess, that people bring, like, oh, Cindy, won't people walk all over me if I take this approach? And no, trust me, nobody would call me a pushover in negotiations. And ironically, even more so since I've taken this new approach, right? When I follow this, as I say, I call it the art of feminine negotiation, call it what you will, but coming from this more collaborative, different model than what we've been taught, I'm not a pushover. I mean, my R-FIT model is the 6 key traits that make for the most effective negotiators. And the A of the R-FIT, it's AREFIT, stands for assertive. So I'm still assertive, and you can stand in a place of assertiveness, but that's not aggressive. We've been duped into confusing the two. Assertive just means coming from a place of confidence. Confidence comes from knowledge, and knowledge comes from preparation. So there are simple models you can use to prepare better, whether in your personal or your professional relationships or negotiations, to be able to get those better outcomes.
Yes, better outcomes. What do you think the most important thing for women to remember as they strive for a purpose-driven life?
Yeah, I think and it's interesting because I started with women on purpose, which I believe is really critical to tap into that passion, as we talked about, to really rediscover what lights you up and fires you up. Don't do what you're expected. I think so many women have what I call a 1-day mindset, right? When, after I have the kids, or when the kids are in school, or when the kids are out of school, or when we have this much money in the bank, or what, there's always
Right,
some other milestone before we live into our vision. So I guess
right.
one thing I would say is get real clarity about what is your vision. What's your 5 years from now? Where do you want to be? Like, invoke all 5 senses, see it, taste it, touch it, smell it. Like, don't just think, oh, I'd like to travel. Be really clear. I want to be in one of those white big villas in Santorini, overlooking those azure waters, like really smelling that salt air. So get real clarity about your vision, and then work your way backwards so that every day you are taking steps to live into that vision. But the second thing I'd say, because for me, the big epiphany, my focus was all about purpose. And then I had sort of a second layer epiphany that changed everything, Kris. And that's when I'm like, oh my gosh, all of life isn't, because people kept saying to me, why aren't you teaching business? Why aren't you teaching negotiation? My gosh, you're a master. And I resisted it until I had my epiphany that all of life is a negotiation. When we're showing up with our kids or our intimate partners or service providers, with banks, insurance companies, and yes, multi-million-dollar deals too, it is all a form of negotiation. So I would invite women, 2 things. One, tap into your vision, get clarity about what it is, and live into it every day. Don't live a to-do mindset, right? Into a to-do world. Every day, do something bold to move towards your vision, and redefine what you think of negotiation. Let go of that thought of the boardroom with everybody in power suits, and get intentional about how you negotiate every relationship. That will allow you to live on purpose.
Great. That intentional. That's great. because we all have an assignment. Everybody's got one, right? And mine isn't any more important than yours. A lot of times I got kind of stuck on that, like I have this big thing to do, but so do you.
Yeah.
And, it's not looked as one is greater or the other. It is the action, right? The intention of doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that, I think most people I think the thing that people find most surprising when they come to me as clients or use my say most people come for the business, right? It's like I
Right.
want more money, I want a better title, I want to advance my career, all of which is important, and we certainly do that, as do you. I mean, I think you've never lost money for a client. It's remarkable. So we definitely do that, but I think the thing they find the most surprising, and I want to invite your listeners to really be thinking about, is recognizing the impact on your personal relationships. Because not only will you have better relationships with your kids and with your intimate partner, with your friends, with other providers, but it's like a beautiful infinity loop, because the more satisfied we are in our personal lives, the richer those relationships are, the more powerfully we show up in our business
That's
world,
right.
which means we get better outcomes, which encourages us to take even more chances. It's like that confidence competence loop that spirals up like a beautiful infinity. So
Really, that's exactly it. And it's alpha and omega, it just keeps, right? It like almost like that thing behind you, you have something that's going like that, right? So, but
Absolutely.
but see, there is an energetic pattern of
Yeah.
creation, and we were just born disconnected, and now it's, reuniting the purpose or the heart and mind and the intention.
Yeah.
How can we support each other, not just women? I know there's some good men on here listening too,
Yes.
so it
Yeah.
isn't a gender thing, but how can we support each other? What can you share with
Oh, that is such a powerful question. I think part of it is getting rid of that scarcity mindset. When we've been conditioned to look at the world as this pie, and there are these limited resources, and for women in particular, because I think there were much fewer opportunities, it was like, I need to get my piece of the pie. And I used to joke, although it's not very funny, because I think there's some truth to it. It's like, you talk about the glass ceiling, women who broke through the glass ceiling, as often as not only did they not reach down to give a hand up, but they brought in a professional glazier to glass it back over again, right? It's like, so I think when we recognize that there's not just a limited piece, there is infinite love out there. We don't have to compete with each other over it. There are
exactly?
infinite opportunities out there. There
That's
are
right.
infinite resources that are available if we reimagine how we look at them. So I think when we get away from that scarcity mindset and recognize that a rising tide truly lifts all boats.
That's right.
And even in my business, I have met a lot of women who are getting into the thought leader space or that entrepreneurial space, and they still are carrying that scarcity mindset and are a little territorial. I'm the opposite. If I have another woman who's teaching about negotiation or empowering women or on purpose, I'm like, hey, here are some of my resources. Feel free to use them in a way that works for you. The more we share,
That's
the
right.
more people become aware of the issue, which means more opportunities for business. So I think when we tap into helping each other, we actually also can come to recognize that we do ourselves a service, because that creates a bigger pie for everybody.
That's it right there. Very, very beautiful. Tell everybody how they can get your book. Your book's doing great. Give us the name and where and how.
You bet. And thanks so much. It's been such a fun conversation, Kris. I
I
love it.
know. Yeah. And I don't want it to end.
Yes. So the book is called The Art of Feminine Negotiation: How to Get What You Want from the Boardroom to the Bedroom. You can get it at Barnes and Noble. You can get it at Amazon. I like to support the bookstores too. So by all means,
Good.
ask for it at your local bookstore or an independent bookstore, even better. But for your listeners, I'll also offer up, if you go to theartoffemininenegotiation.com is my website, all kinds of free resources there, lots of free ebooks and that. And a little secret for your listeners, if you go to artoffemininenegotiationbook.com, it's supposed to be just for people who buy the book, but I'm happy to share that link with you. There are also additional resources, including a workbook. It's better if you have the book, but even if you don't get the book, you'll be able to go through this workbook and start really elevating your skills. And it comes with a load of a lot of extra little nuggets, including a free breakthrough session. So check that out, artoffemininenegotiationbook.com, for some extra freebie treats.
Freebies and very cool. And a consultation. Okay. Very cool. There's plenty of food for thought here because you go to school and you get all of that, but this is the part this needs to be
Yeah.
in taught
Yeah.
basically at a young age. This is what really needs to be taught to people and to teach them to go inside and connect all of that. Maybe just give us all one final note to go off on here to part with you.
Okay. One little tip I'll give, I would say, and thank you, Kris, for all the great work you do as well. I think just
Oh,
so important. You do such a fabulous job at it.
thank you.
So I guess one final tip I would give is whether personally or professionally, any negotiation you're going to go into, use what I call the 5W method. So just get really intentional about who do you want to show up as? Pick 3 words that describe who you want to be so that if things go off kilter, you can ground yourself back in that. Who do they expect you to be? Show up differently, show up better. Who are they going to show up as? Be prepared for that. Think about what you want, both in terms of relationship outcomes and the substantive and the process. Also think about the where and the when. Pick a location that is going to maximize your opportunity to get best outcomes. We forget it. And it's so simple. Choose your timing strategically. And the last W is the why. So who, what, where, when, why? What is my deep why driving this negotiation? And what is the likely deep why of the other party? If you do just that, I guarantee you will totally show up as a better negotiator and get better outcomes.
That's nice. That's great. And I was just thinking as you were saying that, probably more men will be reading this book because they need the art of feminine
Absolutely.
negotiation, right? This
Absolutely.
isn't just for women. This
Yeah.
is for everybody because
Yeah.
this is all the journey that we're all on and we're all here together. So like you
I love
said,
that.
let's all rise us all together. Cindy,
Beautiful.
it's been such a blessing to have you here. Great conversations. Again, The
Thank you.
Art of Feminine Negotiation. That's the book, and they can get it at Barnes and Noble. But go to your site because you got all kinds of free stuff on there, and they
I
can
love
get
it.
that right and take off and get going. And then make sure that you guys subscribe. I do the financial fitness strategy session. You'll hear about it at the end of the show. Health, wealth, and peace of mind. And Cindy, it's been fabulous having you here.
Oh,
And
thank you.
oh
So
my
great
gosh.
that you're such a great host. I loved it.
All right. Hey. Okay. Tell your friends. We'll see
I
you.
will.
Okay. There's so much to learn about healthy money. I hope today's discussion brings you one step closer to securing and protecting your future. So you can get started on the right foot, go to meetwithkrismiller.com and schedule your free financial fitness strategy session. Thank you for listening, and please subscribe to Money 911 so you don't miss our next episode, which includes health, wealth, and peace of mind. The power of purpose. Doing well by doing good. The power of purpose. Doing well by doing good. The power to bless lives inside of